I'd like for you to visualize a tiny little woman, a granny, not in the very best of health. Sort of thin, you know how grannies are, shawl over her shoulders and so forth. Put her in a tiny 2-room house, no running water, no electricity, and give her 20 little children to take care of. 20 little children to take care of. Her 4 strapping sons and their wives are all dead from AIDS. And some of these 20 little children, not sure how many yet, are HIV positive and are eventually going to die of the disease as well. Some of them actually are already showing the lesions of sarcoma. That'd be a kind of hell, wouldn't it, for the granny? Having those kids there and be kind of a hell for the kids living in that kind of an environment. No running water, no electricity, no money, not much of anything, frankly. If it were in a suburb of Houston, we'd want to go out there and do something about it. You know, and we probably could. We could resolve that granny's problem. A few of us could get together, we'd go out there and solve the problem right away. But it's not here. It's in sub-Saharan Africa, and it's the tiniest part of the problem. In 1991, a Washington Post piece on AIDS in Africa allowed that by the year 2000, more than 5 million African adults would die of AIDS. This was in 1991 that they were estimating that by 2000, that more than 5 million African adults would die of AIDS. The reality is that by 1999, last year, 14 million adults and children had died of AIDS in Africa. Generally speaking, in Africa, the AIDS danger has been badly understated. A lot of us in this country, I think, have been lulled to complacency by the fact that it seems to have been overstated here. There was a great deal of panic for a while there and great predictions of an epidemic sweeping the country, and everybody was frightened by it. We made certain steps. You know, a lot of things were done. And AIDS in this country has, I don't know that I would say it's come under control, but at least it's not as frightening as it was once before. It's gone to the back of most people's consciousness. But in Africa, that's not the case. In the United States, the percentage of adults living with AIDS is 0.18%. Just over over 1/100th of a percentage point, or 10th of a percentage point, are actually suffering from AIDS in this country, or HIV positive. In Mexico, that number goes to 0.35, double the number of people who are suffering from AIDS or have the AIDS virus in this country. In Cambodia and Thailand, the number is 2%. 2%, 2 people out of 100 now in Cambodia and Thailand are HIV positive. But in Zimbabwe and Botswana in Africa, the rates are 25% and 26%. 1 person in 4 is HIV positive in these African countries. Our little granny with her 20 orphans is only part of the picture. A lot of orphans are raising themselves. One little family of kids, mama died, dad had already died, and there was no one. There was no granny. There was no aunt. There was no uncle. And they were out there living in their little shack, farming, planting crops, growing them, going to bed hungry every night, children taking care of themselves because there was no one else to take care of them. The orphanages are full. A lot of children are sleeping in the streets. A lot of them are dying there. And that is the situation. In tiny Togo on the west coast of Africa, little old bitty country, many of you could not place it, as a matter of fact, on a map. Tiny little Togo, there are 78,000 orphans from AIDS. Do you realize that's a city the size of Tyler, Texas, composed of nothing but orphans from AIDS? Children whose parents have died from the disease. In Tanzania, there are 500,000 orphans, say the size of Little Rock. And when you get to Uganda, where all this started, there's a close approximation of the population of Houston. Orphans. All of them living tragedies, all of them many of them suffering from AIDS themselves, many of them beginning to resort to prostitution, theft, or whatever they can do in order just to get money, to get food, to stay alive. And they're sleeping where they can, doing what they have to do. and running around like dogs and cats, stray dogs and cats, in the streets of these African cities. In sub-Saharan Africa, there are now over 10 million orphans from AIDS. 10 million. I mean, the number goes right over your head, doesn't it? 10 million of them. You divide it out and figure out how many grannies does that take to take care of them, even at 20 a shot. Divide into that number any kind of combinations of orphanages trying to handle these kids. Just try to grapple with the book. And you know what? They say by the year 2010, there will be 30 million more. 30 million more. Now, just how big does this thing have to get before somewhere along the line, someone's heart begins to break, someone's begins to realize how the depth of the tragedy and to realize what is happening? Some people do, and some people are trying. Bill Gates, for example, is contributing $28 million to try to help with AIDS in Africa. That is really admirable. But it works out to be $2.80 per kid. The United States government, Bill Clinton has pledged U.S. support something like 6 times that amount. I think we're going to give, the United States of America will give about $18 per kid to try to help out in Africa. And you can see very quickly, that doesn't go anywhere. It's like spit on a hot stove. It hits and it's gone. You have to be old enough, by the way, to remember what that's like. When you see these figures, you realize that this thing is huge, and it poses a danger to the world, not merely to Africa, as a matter of fact. To us, there are just so many numbers on a page. You can see a Time magazine in December, Newsweek magazine just this last week, and here are all these numbers. But they represent 10 million lonely, frightened children who are alone, without hope in the world, many of whom face the same terrible death they saw their parents go through. And that's what these children are living with every day. One of the writers said that he saw this little 3-year-old in the lap of Granny, and the look on the face of this child, which already had lesions on his little body, was terrified, because there was an awareness in the child, even at that age, of what had happened and what was happening. These numbers represent a floor full of babies crawling around, who whenever a relief worker walks in the door or a reporter steps in to look around to see the situation, they'll all turn real quickly and start crying out, "Mama! Mama!" But their mama is long since dead. It's just overwhelming. It's just out of control. It's beyond our ability to grasp. It's beyond our ability to deal with it. It's beyond our ability to even know where to start to try to work with it. And yet, oddly enough, most of you sitting here today hold the answer to it right in your lap. In the Bible that you have there. Now, I know this sounds like a terrible oversimplification to say that the Bible is true, is the answer to this question. But in a painful way, it is true. It is true in a terrible way that few people can even begin to comprehend, because they grab hold of so many things relative to the Bible from the wrong end and do not understand the purpose, the idea, the directions that are in the book. Would you turn back with me to Deuteronomy 28? I want you to look anew at a scripture you have probably seen before. You may have heard it preached in relationship to the United States, to Great Britain, to the Israelite nations as we would see them of the world. Listen, though, to what God says. First, he begins by talking about how that if his people would simply obey him. He said, if you will hearken diligently to the voice of the Lord your God, to observe everything that I command you this day, the Lord your God will set you on high above all the nations of the earth, and all these blessings shall overtake you. And then comes this wonderful litany of a utopian society where everything works for them, where their enemies are afraid of them, where they don't have to fear anybody. There's plenty of food, plenty of housing, plenty of clothes. All of us are fine. We're healthy. We're not sick. We're not struggling. It's a wonderful life that is presented to us. But then he says in verse 15, but it shall come to pass, if you will not listen to the voice of the Lord your God, to observe all his commandments and his statutes, which I command you this day, that all these curses will come upon you and overtake you. Cursed shall you be in the city, and cursed in the field. Cursed shall be your basket and your store. Cursed shall be the fruit of your body, and the fruit of your land, the increase of your kind, and the flocks of your sheep. Cursed shall you be when you come in. Cursed shall you be when you go out. And the Lord shall send upon you cursing, vexation, and rebuke in all that you set your hand to do until you be destroyed, until you perish quickly because of the wickedness of your doings, whereby you have forsaken me. The Lord shall make the pestilence cleave to you until he has consumed you from off the land where you go to possess it. The Lord will smite you with a consumption, with a fever, and inflammation, extreme burning, and with the sword, blasting, and mildew, and they shall pursue you until you perish. It occurred to me, as I was reading my way through some of these articles about AIDS and what's going on in Africa, and the terrible circumstance that I read there, is that this is a far better description of those people than it is of us. For if ever there was a people who, from anything that you can see, look like they're under a curse, the sub-Saharan continent of Africa fits that description. It is a wretched place. Sierra Leone used to be called the white man's grave because the white men who went there to do whatever it was that they were trying to do in terms of economic development, even missionaries, you name it, they died there. They were buried there. It was a hard, dangerous, disease-ridden land for the people that went there. Now, the problem with this is that too many people, when they read this kind of thing, do not understand the dynamics that are at work here. And I want to try one more time to help you to understand them. Too many times people assume that, they visualize what I call God at the console. God is in heaven, and in front of him is this giant console, and ahead of him are all these video screens. And on these video screens, there are people living lives and nations carrying out policies and doing the things that they do. And whenever they are getting it right, God reaches over to the switch that has to do with this nation and flips it up. So that then good things begin to happen to this nation because they're doing things that God likes. And over here is a nation that's doing bad things and things that God doesn't like. And God looks at that and frowns deeply and presses a button over here that sets in motion a chain of events that's going to be disastrous for that nation. And God looks at the life of a given individual, and he sees this individual doing bad things, and he flips a switch, and bad things start happening to this person. These things, he says, the Lord shall smite you with a consumption, doesn't it? So it's though God saw you doing this, and he pressed a button, he told an angel, he did whatever it was to do, and he smote you with consumption. There's one thing wrong with this. It's a big thing that's wrong with it. I don't know if you see it or not. When you look around you in the world at large, God is missing far too much stuff. There are too many bad things happening that are not being punished, and there are too many good things happening that are being punished. The old joke, goes, no good deed goes unpunished. Well, sometimes you feel that way. Now, why is this so? Well, you have to understand that God accepts the responsibility for things that go on this planet. And when he says, I will smite you with, I don't think that necessarily, that's poetic language. I don't think he necessarily has to lift a finger to do the kind of thing we're talking about. And I want to show you today, I'm going to try to help you to understand something extremely important about the law of God, why the law of God exists, why it exists in the form in which it exists. And I think we have in sub-Saharan Africa a classic illustration of why this is so. Now, if you'll turn back in your Bible to Leviticus, the 17th chapter, I want to begin to demonstrate this to you. Leviticus chapter 17, in verse 10. Whatsoever the man there be of the house of Israel, or of the strangers that sojourn among you, that eats any manner of blood, I will set my face against that soul that eats blood, and will cut him off from among my people. For the life of the flesh is in the blood, and I have given it to you upon the altar to make an atonement for your souls. It is the blood that makes an atonement for you. Therefore I said to the children of Israel, none of you shall eat blood, neither shall any stranger that sojourns among you eat blood. And whatever man there be of the children of Israel, or the strangers that sojourn among you, which hunts and catches any beast or fowl that may be eaten, he will pour out the blood thereof and cover it with dust. In other words, you're to bury the blood of an animal. Not only are you to pour it out on the ground, you're supposed to put dirt over it. Why? Because the life is in the blood, but now we know stuff about that we didn't know when this was written. We know not only is the life of the body that's in the blood, the life of many, many diseases is also in the blood, don't we? We know, in fact, that the AIDS virus is passed on through human blood primarily, bodily fluids that contain in various and sundry intensities the AIDS virus. The blood is by far and away the most intense source of it in any human being. Now, this commandment to treat the blood of animals this way, even the animals that you take in hunting, is critical in understanding what's going on here. Now, just take a few pages back to Leviticus chapter 11, to another law. This one, perhaps, just as familiar to you. The Lord spoke to Moses and Aaron, saying, Speak to the children of Israel. These are the beasts which you shall eat of all the beasts that are on the earth. Whatever parts the hoof and is cloven-footed, and chews the cud among the beasts, that you shall eat. Nevertheless, you shall not eat of them that chew the cud or that divide the hoof, as the camel, because it does divide the hoof. It chews the cud, but it does not divide the hoof. In other words, there's this whole long litany here of animals that you can eat, animals that you can't eat, and the principles whereby you make the decision on these animals is given to you. Now, what does all this have to do with anything? Eating blood and the eating of animals that are not permitted to eat. Well, I don't know if you're aware of this, but the most dominant theory on the origin of the AIDS virus and the AIDS epidemic among human beings is that the AIDS virus was originally not HIV, but SIV. It was a simian variety. It was in a certain breed of, or a certain genus of monkey in Africa that was hunted for food. And so you have hunters who are catching these monkeys, butchering these monkeys, getting their blood all over their bodies. I presume also eating the flesh of these monkeys with the blood in them, not having killed them properly. And so here are two laws out of the Bible that are being broken. They are eating an animal, hunting an animal for food that is prohibited to be eaten for food. And they are not being careful with the blood. And this, according to many of the scientists that I have read, is the vector by which the AIDS virus entered the human population, and it happened somewhere in southern Uganda in Africa. Now think about that just for a minute, and think about the implications of these two broken laws that open the door for a virus to enter the human population and begin to cause the problems that are there. And then ask yourself, well, now wait a minute. God is at the console. He's looking at all this. He sees these hunters eating these unclean animals, these monkeys, and he flips a switch that causes them to have this problem? Or, knowing the human body, knowing the animal bodies, knowing the viruses, knowing all the bacteria, knowing all the health problems that a human being can face, is it rather that God from the very beginning revealed to man and created a structured administration, a disciplined administration, to teach people what to do and what not to do relative to animals and blood? Which way was it? Is it really doesn't make any difference what you eat, but that God says, well, I don't want you eating these animals, and if you eat them, I'm going to get you? Is that what we're dealing with? God at the console, flipping switches, making His law work? Or is His law a revelation of the things that are going to kill us if we don't watch ourselves? Well, this is not all. Let's take a little further on this thing. Most tragedies, most great tragedies, are not the result of a single simple error. You know, when an airplane crashes and you hear of 200 or 300 people who have died and they go charging off looking for this or looking for that, you'll hear pilots who get on there and who will tell you this. They'll tell you that generally speaking, most accidents with airplanes and airliners are not the result of one mistake. They are the result of a whole series of things that built up on this particular flight and ended up in this terrible disaster. Most of the time, this is true with flying accidents and so forth, with many other things. All right? I'm not going to ask you to turn to this particular scripture. I will simply read it because it is so short. It's Exodus 20 and verse 14. It is the seventh commandment. Thou shalt not commit adultery. Now here is one more law. A law that simply says one man, one woman for life. You're not supposed to have sex with anybody except your wife or your husband, and that's it. Now, it doesn't take very long to figure out that even with the HIV virus having entered the bodies of those hunters, that if those men had stayed faithful to their wives and their wives to their husbands, they may have gotten sick, but that disease would have gone nowhere. Right? So we have a third law that has been broken in this situation. And that's not all of them. Let's turn back to Leviticus 15. No, I'm sorry, not Leviticus 15. I think I have got myself in the wrong place here. No, I don't. Leviticus 20, and once again, I don't think you need to turn to this. It's only one verse. If a man also lie with mankind as he lies with woman, both of them have committed an abomination, they shall surely be put to death. Their blood is upon them. Homosexual behavior is strictly prohibited. And of course, everybody by now knows that the primary vector in bringing that disease into this country and spreading it so widely into this country was homosexuals and the homosexual promiscuity. You know, like I said, one man with one woman, the exchange of bacteria and viruses back and forth between them over their life, they become immune to that type of thing coming from one another. They're harmless to one another. But whenever you add one more person into that mix, everything changes. Add 2 more and it changes again. Add 40, 100 more, and everything goes crazy. I was so shocked recently when I watched this incredible program on Frontline on PBS, The Lost Children of Rockdale County in Georgia. I really recommend that you get that video and watch it for your church. You can get it from PBS for $25. And it's a staggering thing to realize. The extent to which children in our society are now being, little kids. I mean 12, 13, 14-year-old girls who are racking up not just 1 or 2 guys that they've had sex with, but 20 or 30 guys that they've had sex with. Violating these fundamental, basic, underlying laws. Is God flipping switches? I haven't noticed it. I mean, it isn't something that's happening on a daily basis. There aren't bolts of lightning coming down from the sky. Not everybody who commits a sin is dying immediately, but remember this. All these great tragedies develop of a series of things that build over time. Now we have seen 4 straightforward biblical laws dealing with anyone, at these different points, we might have headed off either part or all of this HIV explosion that's taken place in Africa that now has created 10 million orphans, has killed up to this point some 14 million people. 14 million people dead. That this all comes about as a result of this. I mean, these laws could have prevented this from taking place. Now, let's see a couple more. Leviticus 15. And the Lord spoke to Moses and Aaron, saying, Speak to the children of Israel and say to them, When any man has a running issue out of his flesh, because of his issue he is unclean. This shall be his uncleanness in his issue, whether the flesh run with his issue, or it be stopped, it's his uncleanness. Every bed on which he lies is unclean. Everything whereon he sits is unclean. Whosoever touches his bed shall wash his clothes, bathe himself in water, and be unclean to the evening, and so on and so on and so on. We all know by now that one of after blood, the second highest intensity, apparently, of HIV virus in the body is male semen. And so consequently, when men have an issue out of their flesh, this is to be treated very carefully. Again, the whole thing originally is one man, one woman, they do exchange bodily fluids commonly. And whatever happens between them is limited to them, that family. It will go no further than that. But once you start adding other people coming in contact with bodily fluids, stuff happens. And this is one of the most intense areas whereby in the ceremonial law, provision was made that everyone should be especially careful of the bodily issues in these circumstances. That's a law. Okay? Then we pass on down to another law, verse 19. If a woman have an issue, and her issue in her flesh be blood, she shall be put apart 7 days. Whoever touches her shall be unclean to the evening. Everything that she lies upon shall be unclean. Everything she sits upon shall be unclean. Whosoever touches her bed shall wash his clothes and bathe in flesh and water, and be unclean until the even. Whoever touches anything that she sat upon shall wash his clothes, bathe himself in water, and be unclean till even. If it be on her bed, or on anything whereon she sits, when he touches it, he shall be unclean until the even. And if any man lie with her at all, and her flowers be upon him, he shall be unclean 7 days, and all the bed whereupon he lies shall be unclean. Now, once again, the bodily fluids, the issues out of the human, sex organs, these are sources of, intense possibility for contamination, for disease vectoring, for these things being passed on. A man is prohibited from having sex with a woman during her menstrual period. For what reason? Because that's when the possibility of passing on disease becomes very great. Now we've made our way down. We've got 5, 6, maybe 7 different laws that we see in the Old Testament having to do with people, which will bring on or allow to take place something like the AIDS epidemic. Now, did breaking these laws cause it? Oh, I wouldn't go so far as to say that. But what I would tell you is that obeying these laws would have prevented it. Take the whole package of 6 or 7 laws right here, just this set. That set of laws would have prevented the deaths of some 15 plus million people. Would have prevented making 10 million orphans in Africa as a result of that disease. Would have saved countless hundreds of thousands of lives in the United States, Great Britain, Cambodia, Thailand, around the world. And many of these lives are yet to be lost way out ahead of us now. And of course, the lives of millions of children who are still alive, their lives have been destroyed. They'll never have a life that amounts to anything. Now, I don't know if you realize the implications of what I've told you here. But what I've told you here is that what Africa needs is a good dose of the Old Covenant. Think about it. These laws I've been giving you are Old Covenant laws. They are the discipline that God imposed upon Israel. But you have to understand this, that the structured discipline of the Old Covenant is one thing. The underlying law which is brought into that structured discipline is another thing altogether. You follow me on that? That the structured discipline is that if a man does this, we will punish him in our community. If a woman does this, we will punish them in our community. So that discipline is imposed upon a people to make them keep these laws. But the laws themselves are far deeper than any administration that ever was created to enforce them. And the laws about not eating blood, not eating certain animals, not hunting monkeys out of the trees in Africa and getting yourself covered with blood and eating the flesh of those monkeys with the blood. Not sleeping with somebody else's wife. Not sleeping with someone of your same gender. Not being careless regarding the issues out of the flesh. Not having sex whenever a woman is having her period. All these things together, these are fundamental laws. They have to do with health, and as long as there are human beings, you cannot repeal them. And just because there isn't some covenant structured administration over you, forcing you to keep them, doesn't mean that these laws have been done away with. To me, this is the same old covenant that a lot of fools think modern man doesn't need. They picture God at the console again, flipping switches. And God, way back when, He made some laws, and He punished people for breaking these laws. In other words, here's a whole set of laws. He punishes people for breaking these laws. And then, in the process of time, He abolishes every one of the laws that He punished those people for breaking. Let me ask you this. If you're sitting up here in Huntsville in jail for having broken a law, and then Congress or the state legislature down here repeals the law because they concluded it was a bad law, how are you going to feel? Are you going to be prepared to sit there quietly and serve out the rest of, say, 20 more years of your term when they've repealed the law? Or are you going to want to be let out when they've repealed the law? Candidly, I don't know what they do about that. But knowing the wisdom of our legislatures, they'll probably keep him in there. Because he broke the law. When he broke the law, it was the law. Just because we didn't really need the law and we repealed the law now doesn't mean he gets to go out and go free. And so it is. The law of God, what Africa needs is a good dose of the Old Covenant. The law is a revelation of what works and what doesn't, of the destructive forces that lurk out of sight, waiting to drown us in destruction and perdition. Among the Gentiles, we can right now see the most graphic illustration imaginable of the law of God. In this case, 2 out of the 4 laws that we're talking about are moral laws. The remaining 4 are ceremonial laws. What are you supposed to do about that? Ignore them? Pay no attention to them? Say, well, they were Old Covenant. They were all done away with. And yet these very laws, if obeyed, would have prevented the tragedy that is now destroying the continent of Africa. And those people down there are people just like us. Those grandmothers weep when their children die. Those grandmothers, lie awake at night with tears running down their face because of their little babies that are lying there with lesions all over their bodies and crying out in the night with the pain of Kaposi's sarcoma. These mothers, these people all hurt when their children die of pneumonia and other AIDS-related diseases. They're people just like us. And they didn't know about these laws. I have to realize, and I just don't think very many people today do realize, that the reason why we are as wealthy, as healthy, as successful as we are in the Western world is because underlying our legal system is this book, the Bible. We try hard to get rid of it. We try hard to ban it from schools. We try hard to keep it out of our lives as much as possible. But this book underlies most of English common law, which in turn underlines most of our law today. We realize, frankly, from the Bible that you've got to have certain kinds of health laws. Scientifically, we know more about some of these things than we did when these laws were originally written. And sometimes we know why these laws work, and sometimes we don't know why these laws work the way they work. So what are we supposed to do? Just take a chance? I've often thought about this when I hear people say, well, the reason why pork was outlawed in the Bible was because there was no refrigeration and because they didn't have health departments and they couldn't supervise the meat then like we can today. And therefore, because things have changed, it's okay now. It's not going to hurt you health-wise to eat pork. At one level, I can understand that argument. At another level, though, I keep asking myself, okay, but what is there that we don't know yet? Because the people in Africa didn't know that eating those monkeys and the monkey's blood would cause the problem for them that it caused. And they didn't know that sleeping with 14 women, in a couple of weeks' period of time as a guy made his way across the country would be a problem to them. They didn't know. They didn't have this. They didn't know that they shouldn't take on multiple wives. And they didn't know that their wives shouldn't be sleeping around with other people. They didn't know any of these things. They just have many friends, and they have sex with many friends. Back originally, when God pronounced His blessing upon Abraham, He said, "In you shall all nations of the earth be blessed, in you and in your seed." And I really believe that the nations of the world have been blessed by the things that we as a people often have been able to do. I think they were blessed by Israel, but I also look back down through time. And I realize that one of the greatest failures that Israel ever made, one of the greatest mistakes that we make this day, is that we do not take to the people the law of God. Because it is in the law of God that the knowledge lies to create the discipline and the structure around to administer in whatever way it needs to be administered so that we can save people's lives in the here and now. Man's solution? Give them condoms. The only problem is we have still not figured out a way to put a condom around our heart and around our mind. We have not figured out a way to solve the multiple problems that come alongside of the diseases and the sicknesses. In that situation over in the Lost Children of Rockdale County in Conyers, Georgia, in one high school, they found a girl that had, or actually I don't know if it was a girl, I think it was a boy maybe that went into the clinic first and was diagnosed with syphilis. And they began in this health department's will to start tracing every single one of those contacts. And it wound up with a chart on the board that looked like an incredible convoluted set of spider webs up there, and wound up finding 17 cases of syphilis in one high school and treating 200 students for exposure to syphilis. By the way, you do know why they treat for exposure when you have not yet tested positive? It's easy to miss. If people don't spot the symptoms, there is a sore, there's a rash, and sometimes these come and go and a person doesn't notice them, and syphilis goes dormant. It can lie dormant for 20 years. But the end of the person who has syphilis is oftentimes insanity and always death, because those little spirochete bacteria go to the brain and go to the heart. And the end of a person who has contracted that is miserable, and so you don't take chances. You give them antibiotics, you try to control this thing, and you hope against hope that you've got it. But we think, somehow or other, that the laws that we read about in the Bible are arbitrary. It isn't that there's something real, literal underneath them and behind them. Well, God could just as easily have said, thou shalt commit adultery as not. Or as one person put it to me, sin is chocolate and God hates chocolate. Now you talk about a theology to live with. I call it a theology to die with, because I don't think that's the reason why God hates sin. I think God hates sin because sin destroys His creation. And His creation, in millions of little children, millions, not just thousands, millions of little children, is being destroyed every single day. Today, in Africa, 6,000 people will die of AIDS. And another 6,000 tomorrow. All deaths that could have been prevented with a good dose of the Old Covenant. Turn back, if you would, in conclusion, to Isaiah 61. This is a scripture that Jesus Himself cited. Stood up one day in a synagogue, read it, and then sat down and began to teach from this passage. Let's read what He had to say. The Spirit of the Lord God is upon me, because the Lord has anointed me to preach good tidings to the meek. He has sent me to bind up the brokenhearted, to proclaim liberty to the captives, the opening of the prison to them that are bound, to proclaim the acceptable year of the Lord and the vengeance of our God, and to comfort everybody that mourns, to appoint them that mourn in Zion, to give them beauty for ashes, the oil of joy for mourning, the garment of praise for the spirit of heaviness, that they might be called trees of righteousness, the planting of the Lord, that He might be glorified. And they shall build the old wastes, they shall raise up the former desolations, repair the waste cities, the desolations of many generations. How do you think all those desolations got there? They got there because of sin. All I have done today is to take a little narrow slice of the pie of God's law and show you how that the ignorance of that law, the neglect of that law, the unaware, not even knowing about that law, has led to one of the greatest tragedies in the history of mankind. And there is an entire panoply of God's revelation to man, which we call the law, which stands there ready to inform our conscience, inform our mind, inform our government about a better way to do these things than the way we have done them up to now. Strangers shall stand and feed your flocks. The sons of the alien shall be your plowmen and your vine dressers. You shall be named priests of the Lord. Men shall call you ministers of God. You shall eat the riches of the Gentiles, and in their glory shall you boast yourselves. For your shame you shall have double. For your confusion they shall rejoice in their portion. Therefore in their land they shall possess double. Everlasting joy shall be there. For I, the Lord, love judgment. I really like judgment, God said. You know what He means by that? He means people who evaluate something and come to a sound, sensible judgment about what to do about it. And that judgment can be informed by the law of God. I hate robbery for burnt offering. Somebody go out and stick a gun in somebody to get an animal to go offer. He said, God says, I hate that type of thing. I will direct their work in truth. I'll make an everlasting covenant with them. And their seed shall be known among the Gentiles, their offspring among all people. All that see them shall acknowledge them, that they are the seed which the Lord has blessed. You know what I see here? I see a prophecy looking forward to a time in the future when those people who know God are rescued from their own mistakes and their own stupidity and their own sin and are sent out to be a light to the Gentiles. And God knows the Gentiles need a light. They could use a good, strong dose of the Old Covenant.